Welcome to the Code for Couples podcast, focusing on topics for law enforcement officers and couples to keep you and your relationship connected, resilient, and code for. Now, your host, law enforcement expert Cindy Doyle, author of Hold the Line, and my wife.
Hey there, welcome back to Code for Couples. I am your host, Cindy Doyle, licensed professional counselor and author of Hold the Line. Today, I have AK Dozanti, a former sheriff's deputy turned wellness advocate, coach, and author of Beat the Burnout, Stress Prevention Solutions for the Frontline. After experiencing the silent toll of burnout firsthand, she now helps first responders reclaim their health, humanity, and resilience through lifesaver wellness. Her mission is to create a culture where supporting mental health is seen as strength and not weakness. And her story definitely talks about that. AK, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to talk about the book and your journey and the story because there is so much here. So thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for bringing me on. I think it's going to be a fun opportunity to bring a lot of this stuff into the light more. We cannot pass up opportunities to turn up the volume on these kind of conversations. So I'm grateful to be here.
I like that. Turn up the volume. And we're on a podcast. There you go. I like that. So ironically, we honored our own self because this is attempt 3 to do this podcast because you were sick initially and before I went to Italy. And you were like, I think you had lost your voice. Maybe it was even from speaking or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, let's honor wellness because that's dumb if we're going to do this. And then last Friday, I had come back from my 3-week vacation in Europe and you were like, no, honor your body. And I just loved it that we were like, it's okay. You got to practice what you preach. And sometimes that can be
100%. Yes. I'm actually in that season right now where I slightly overbooked myself for the last few weeks, had a ton of speaking engagements with some travel involved. And I was like, you know what? I think I might have overdone it. So I am, the next couple weeks, I'm pumping the brakes and I'm just going to pull back and I'm going to reset, refocus, and then rise again. And that's going to be my mantra. So reset, refocus, rise again. I'm going to have to write that down and put that as a sticky note on my computer monitor or something. That's good. I just used it a couple days ago.
You just got back from Colorado. So that was, I even saw the beautiful challenge coins they gave you.
Yeah, I did. It was the county sheriffs of Colorado, wellness ambassadors, and I had an 8-hour day with them. And I said, you know what, this is a really unique opportunity. We're not going to talk about wellness. We're going to do the wellness. And so we did. We made connections. They were a little scared at first. They were like, I don't know. But we slowed down. We did not rush the day. That was a huge part of it. Just that alone. Built real connections. And we actually did yoga and, the breathing and some reflection, journaling. I mean, it was like a mini retreat. So it was awesome. It was a really wonderful opportunity.
Let's back up just slightly and talk about your journey and your career. So you're a former sheriff's deputy and I know burnout's involved. I know the story because I read the book, but tell the audience a little bit about your career. And I'm going to call it the slow slide that happened.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Yeah, because burnout's very sneaky. So I started my law enforcement career really young. I was only 19. And what I didn't realize was, you think when you kind of turn 18, you kind of turn the page and everything's fresh and new. But we really carry our entire life experience into the career with us. And so just 2 years prior to that, I had lost my lifelong best friend since we were 4 years old to suicide. And I didn't deal with it because I didn't know how. And I was 17, you just kind of figure, wow, it was devastating, but like life has to continue. And so I started doing undercover online investigations, really got hooked. I was in my undergrad at the Academy when I was 20. as soon as I graduated with my undergrad, started as a deputy sheriff, did some different positions there, and then made it onto road patrol, which was where the bulk of my career was. And I absolutely loved my job, and I poured I became the job, right? Down to, I was meal prepping and working out twice a day and like doing all of the things that we do to be a good cop. 2015, I was Officer of the Year. And by September of that year, I was crispy. I was experiencing severe depression, PTSD, what I later found out, and some call this pseudoscience, but what I later found out was adrenal fatigue and suicidal ideation. And so it got to the point where I recognized, and thank God I had enough wherewithal, and I had enough, I could rub enough brain cells together to see that I was not only a liability to myself, but I was becoming a liability to the people that I swore to serve. And
that's crushing.
Yeah. I think that was kind of my ultimate deciding factor was, if I can't show up the way I swore to, then I have to go. And so it was either me or the job. And I chose me, which was very hard, but I ended up becoming a criminal court victim advocate and took advantage of that regular working schedule and went back and got my master's degree and jumped into yoga teacher training and started learning all kinds of different things and putting pieces together. And then in 2020, I left that position. In 2021, I started Lifesaver Wellness.
That's amazing. It's, part of what you said, and you skimmed over it really quickly, was
Of course
I made a choice. I made a choice to leave. And I'm like, because in the book, that was a really hard decision. And it resonated with me, not because of the career so much, but because this is what I took away. And you can be like, but I almost felt like, man, I have to fail at this thing that I love so much in order to win with my life. And that was so, like, when I read that, and you didn't write that, that's just what I wrote, or what I took away with it. But the churn of deciding, the permission was who gave you that permission to leave?
My now husband.
Okay, I thought so.
He cracked open the door because I had never even considered that to be a possibility. And he saw it went from it being a little bit of a novelty of like, yeah, my girlfriend's this badass cop, to he saw what was going on behind the curtain. And he was like, you don't have to do this forever. Like, and I was like, what? It was like a revolutionary thought.
It is, right?
And yeah, because you just, you get into it and you expect it, you stand there and you get sworn in, and it's like you can picture your whole career ahead of you, and then you picture the beautiful retirement and all the things.
Right.
And you never even consider that you might have to pivot. And so yes, he cracked open the door, and he was like, you can do other things. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so just that alone really, again, gave me that permission to consider other options. And it really turned out to be the biggest change in trajectory that I had.
I think, I know there's so much in the book, but that moment I think was so important to highlight, because in a field where we look at like, get your 20 in, like just hit your 20. But man, some people will hit 8 years in. Like I have them in my therapy office, right? And they hit 8 years in and they're like, I got 12 years left. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, yes. And what are those 12 years going to look like just because you want to hit your 20? And that permission to be like, it doesn't make you lesser because you go and choose your own life. And I think our culture, right? The law enforcement culture is like, oh, well, is it weakness? Like you couldn't hack it? You couldn't handle it?
Right.
How did you mentally get through that? And how do you encourage others to mentally move through that step if they have to take care of themselves?
Well, I think just having the kind of getting out of the echo chamber and seeing that, you get to do this work. You don't have to see it as a privilege or a blessing to be able to show up. But because I don't want to guilt people into thinking, well, I don't see it as I get to. So is there something wrong with me because it feels like I have to? But just reframing that alone can really help just your mindset every single time you go into a shift. But for me, it took a long time to kind of reconcile with it. I did stay on as a special deputy, so I still had the uniform for a few years, and then I picked up like an auxiliary position for a little while. I just couldn't fully let it go. But giving yourself the space to be more than just a cop is huge. You have to, because you cannot wrap your identity up into it, because what that does to the way you see your life and the way you show up is it fragments you, and then you feel deluded when you're at home or you go to work and you feel deluded there. And so I talk about how you have to kind of decompartmentalize and bring all of the parts of you back together and realize that you're one whole human, and you're human first. Your job can be incredibly important and meaningful, but it can't be everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. It does. And I just want to, it's important to bring that part up, because it's a common epidemic maybe within our culture. It's not just law enforcement and first responder culture. Like, there's all different kinds of people that do that, and they think they have to stick it out. And it's almost like institutionalization, right? Where you have to finish this. And I just thought sometimes that feeling of failure means that you're winning in your life, and you went through that process. And I go back to your now husband, who said, you don't have to do that. And just somebody giving that to you. And so if you're listening and you're thinking, maybe I need to tell my spouse, you don't have to, it's okay if we shift careers. It's okay if we do something different. Or maybe you're in a space where you need to hear, you don't have to, you get to. It's a choice, but it's a choice every day. And sometimes that choice needs to change. So thank you for saying that in this book, because it's a very, I'm going to use the V word, vulnerable thing to say, but nobody likes that word, like vulnerability.
right.
But
Gross.
yeah, so there's the gross, yuck. How did you, so really quickly, you mentioned this, you said some people see adrenal fatigue as pseudoscience. I was surprised by that, because I think so I think, y'all know, I talk about the cortisol dump and how it affects the body. And I'm just like, isn't that a duh? Like, your brain gets tired of working and doing all that. So that's interesting that there's some people still out there that see adrenal fatigue as voodoo science.
I actually, I mentioned it to my former therapist, and they were like, oh, so like pseudoscience, whatever. But then he also talked about made up diagnoses from TikTok. And I quickly pivoted and found somebody who is more familiar with first responders.
Yes, I was going to say I understand being a clinician. I understand people coming in with TikTok diagnoses, like they've diagnosed themselves. But when you're working with a first responder, they're most likely not going to just latch onto something. So interesting. Okay, well, I'm glad that worked out.
But it's been confirmed by other mental health clinicians and doctors since then, because what I experienced when I left full-time law enforcement was a restraint collapse. And I slept for about 18 hours a day, every single day for a month. And it was completely involuntary. I was so angry, to be honest, because I had so many things that I wanted to do and I couldn't get my body to cooperate. And it makes a lot of sense now, but I like to warn people about that, because if you go out on medical, or if you just take some time off, or if you take some mental health, like a mental health sabbatical, or you retire, you might experience that. Your nervous system has been going too hard for too long. And I don't want people to experience that and think, oh, I'm depressed because I no longer have a purpose. I need to go back. I want you to give it 6 months. Let your body balance out. And so I like to just bring that up because a lot of people experience that and they're like, oh, now I just don't have a purpose. And they think they're depressed and their body is acting and behaving in a depressed manner. And that might cause you to believe you're depressed. And that might cause then your thoughts and your feelings and your actions to dive further into that. So something to watch out for sure.
So you were talking about your body needing to recover and the adrenal fatigue. And our body tries to tell us something's wrong, something's amiss, right? And when we don't listen, our body physically will send up flames and fireworks to let us know. And sometimes we just dismiss that. What are some of the things that people need to watch out for and how do we start to recognize what burnout is, right? Because sometimes burnout is like, oh, it's burnout. And people don't understand that there's actually signs and symptoms and warning signs. Yeah, I teach a 2-day workshop on it. So I resonate with everything that you talk about.
Yeah.
What are the things that people need to identify as burnout and start to watch for?
Yeah. So for sure, it becomes a lot of it is like kind of self-talk in the way we talk to ourselves, but it can show up certainly in the body, in the way we behave. We start cutting corners in the body. So those are typically, we will kind of ignore these things for a while, but very frequent headaches, gut health issues. Sometimes it shows up in skin issues, low libido, muscle tension. The exhaustion is a huge part of it, that fatigue. So it's really a full like mental, physical, emotional, and then what I call a soul fatigue, because I feel like, especially for first responders, it hits on a deeper level because we're dealing with some of the harshest, most heartbreaking things that humanity can experience. And we kind of just discount it that we experience that or that we witness that because it's just part of the job, right? And so we don't actually take heed to that. Another piece of it, another facet, the 3 main facets are the exhaustion, the cynicism, which shows up in the skepticism, the sarcasm, the not trusting, it's a psychological distancing from things that we don't understand or things that might be painful or things that we actually do want, but we don't want to admit it, or we don't feel like we actually are worthy or capable of attaining it. So, like I wouldn't want that job anyway. I wouldn't want $1 million anyway. Like we start to kind of just put down the things that we actually do desire because hope feels vulnerable. So it's the exhaustion, the cynicism, and then that low self-efficacy, which is really just feeling.
That's a fancy word.
It is. So it's just feeling like you don't really make a difference anymore, or you don't make an impact anymore. And a lot of times, I think law enforcement in particular experience this because we get into the job thinking that, we're gonna save the world. We're gonna put all the bad guys away. We're gonna save all the good guys, all of these things. And then what you end up dealing with is, the neighbor's chickens are in my yard and so-and-so's got my mail and won't give it back, or it just the mundane just BS calls that we deal with on the day to day. And I would say other first responders deal with that as well, for sure.
Oh yeah.
Which leads into compassion fatigue because you just your give a damn kind of gets busted after a while.
Yes.
So really noticing these things for a prolonged period of time. So, if of course you're going to feel it here and there, but if you're like 6 weeks in and you're like across the board feeling all of these things, burnout's knocking on your door, and it might have snuck in already a couple of times. And if you don't start recognizing it and managing it, it's going to move in and take up residency, and then it's harder to evict after a while.
Yeah. I know there's a physical aspect to it, and there's so many aspects of first responder or law enforcement culture in particular, that it's like you're set up to fail or you're set up to burn out because you can't recover in the way you need to recover. It's not like, I'm going to pick on firefighters here. It's not like you get 48.96 off or whatever you get, right? It's like, oh, you might get, 6-7 hours to go home, try to sleep, get up, do it all over again. And you're doing that 3 or 4 days in a row, and then you'll have a couple days off, and then you don't really recover. So the system itself, many times, I think, I'm curious what you think, is set up to, in the culture at times, we could talk about, like, let's talk about things, right? Let's, like you said, like, let's recognize that you're doing this day in and day out. And there's really, the brain can't really handle that, right? Because it wants to put it in the chuck it bucket. I actually call it something else, but I'm saying chuck it.
Me too.
But it wants to put it in the bucket because how else does it process it? Do you agree?
Yeah. And to kind of, I don't know if it's an oversimplification, but when you think about it, so the Greek word for stress is strictus, which means a tightening or a narrowing. And of course, first responders experience stress. We get these adrenaline dumps. It's high pressure. The stakes are really high. So we have this constricting and this narrowing, but trauma is a nervous system overwhelm. So we are overwhelming an already constricted nervous system. Of course, you're not, if you don't make time and carve out time for recovery and find every little pocket that you can to find a little bit of respite, you really are kind of set up to fail. And that does not mean you're doomed. What it means is you have to create sustainable systems to manage it. And you have to be more vigilant about it because of the position that you're in and the environment that you're in.
So let's talk about some of those sustainable systems. The thing is, I agree, it's always better to be proactive than reactive. But many times, including myself, including yourself, I have found myself in a situation where I'm like, oops. Like, I do this for a living.
Did it again.
Preach it again. Shit, here I am again. So what are these systems that need to be set up? What would you recommend for people?
For one, stop scheduling every second of every day. I feel like we all overcomplicate and we overdo because our worth is tied up in our utility, and then we end up feeling used. So we have to stop overscheduling ourselves. Most of the sustainable systems are the things that are completely undervalued and overlooked, like sleep. Sleep is huge. We like, somewhere along the lines, it became a flex to show up and say, I only got 3 or 4 hours of sleep, but look at me go. I'm still here with my monster in hand. And it's not a flex. It makes you an absolute liability to yourself and to other people. And
Brene Brown will talk about that being an armor. Like, it's an overfunctioning. There's pride in overfunctioning. And that is a way that we overcompensate when we don't feel like we can handle it. So there's research behind it there. Done.
Yes. Thank you. Precisely. And so doing things like that and saying like, oh, I haven't eaten 12 hours or, I took on this overtime shift and all of those things, like, we think it makes us appear stronger. And it's like, bro,
dumbass.
You need to go sleep. You need to go eat and don't come back for 2 days. But, making sure that you're getting good quality sleep, watching your nutrition, and making sure that you're eating more protein and balancing out your blood sugar, because your mood follows your blood sugar. So if you spike it first thing in the morning with simple carbs and sugar and caffeine and all the things, it's got to come back down. Because when you're getting these adrenaline dumps, when you're getting the cortisol dumps, it's spiking your blood sugar, your calcium, your white blood cells, all of those things. And when that crash happens, there's a ton of other things that happen, in your body.
Yeah.
And cognitive abilities, your cognitive connections are one of those things. And so if you want to stay sharp, more protein, less simple carbs, hydrating, making sure you're flushing all of the cortisol and adrenaline out, good, solid relationships. We have such a tendency to just go, 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 and not even think about investing effort into our relationships. But the number one indicator of how well you're going to bounce back or recover from a critical incident is the support system you have before that critical incident happens. And we just discount it. Because of the cynicism, we stop trusting people, we isolate, we withdraw. And if we're experiencing all these burnout symptoms, we don't want anybody to see it. Like, don't look at me because you might catch a glimpse, right? And so we just distance ourselves. And I think that was one of the biggest things for me was I lived alone and I was able to keep people at an arm's length. I was able to hide behind my closed doors until I wasn't, until I got into a relationship with somebody that actually cared and was like, let's take a deeper look of, yes, he saw me. And, those relationships, I'm just going to turn into my nerd self here for a minute, but there was a report in 2023 by the Surgeon General called the Loneliness Epidemic. And it was on the heels of COVID. And they basically reported that if you don't have safe and healthy relationships in your life, it is more detrimental to your physical health than drinking 6 alcoholic beverages a day or smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Wow.
So that's just our physical health. Not even, right. There's your science. There's your evidence. That's not even our mental health. Or our emotional health.
And so that, toot, like that's why we do this podcast, right? Because I want spouses and officers to understand that their relationship is so important because it is one of the safety factors for you to be able to retire in a healthy way and to survive this job. And so now you're saying like, hey, it also helps with burnout. That's amazing.
100%. And it helps with your physical health as well. And
yes.
that's going to allow you to perform better on the job, but also what our nervous systems really need. And some might think this sounds soft, but our nervous systems need a felt sense of safety.
Yes.
And how do we get that? Oftentimes it's through connection with other people.
Yes.
And we've become, just as a society, I think we are not in proximity with each other as much. But when we are, how many years did we go where we had to have 6 feet in between us? It was a couple of years where it was like everybody social distancing. And it's really underestimated the power of being in proximity with people that you feel safe with. That's that sense of belonging that truly is, it's in our DNA that we need that. That's part of being tribal beings, and that's what our ancestors,
I don't want to go too nerdy.
Societies.
I don't want to go too nerdy on this, but I keep thinking vagus nerve, which we don't have time to go into today. But basically, you have this giant nerve in your body that goes from your brain to your stomach. That's why gut health is so important. And that nerve tells your brain when you're safe. And one of the number one things is community. It wants to feel like a hug. And so as much as you're sitting here, because I said, what do we do to start working on the burnout? And I'm like, hugs. But, there's so many other different things that you could do, but that's a part of it, right? One of the things that you talked about that was really important was processing feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Often, I think, some of the biggest things that the old school ways that we were kind of taught to deal with all of the stuff we see on the job is avoiding, just pretending that it doesn't exist. But I think it was Ayn Rand that said, you can avoid reality, but you can't avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. Like, you can stick your head
ouch.
Yes, you can stick your head in the sand, but the storm might still knock you over. Like,
right.
But you can, so the avoidance, the compartmentalizing, just saying leave work at work and at home, and you just put
Doesn't
all of
work.
these things that you see in this magical place called away. But your nervous system is collecting all of it, right? Your vagus nerve is collecting all of it. And you are one whole human with one brain, one body, one nervous system, one life. And to think that you could fragment yourself into these two different people, this work self and this home self, and still show up as a whole person is we're lying to ourselves to think that that's
It's
possible.
like delusional.
Yes, that's why I say we have to decompartmentalize. We have to integrate. That's how we move forward with integrity, not the kind of integrity that is, doing the right thing, but the kind of integrity that is to be complete. And healing is to be made whole, right? So, being able to integrate these parts and feel safe, that's going to give you that felt sense of safety in your nervous system. And then the last one is we numb out. We just, we find any way, we buy the shiny things and then have to work more overtime to maintain the shiny things. And we binge on social media or TV or food. Some people have questionable relationships to find that excitement in their lives and numb out. Some people rage out. Some people use alcohol. There's a million different ways to numb out, but we have to absolutely start diving in face forward into these feelings, because really they're just data and evidence from the body.
Oh, I like that. Feelings are data and evidence from the body. Once again, right? The body is trying to tell you something. We're just conveniently pushing it to the side, right? Like, oh, I'll cross that finish line and I'll be better, but it doesn't happen. So we have some behaviors. We have some behaviors that address burnout. We have some feelings we need to identify, and kind of thinking about that. One of the things that I love in your book is this acronym called SNAGS that deal with thought patterns. And I know we don't have time to go into this today, but I'm going to give a little teaser to our listeners here. And so the SNAGS was subconscious biases, negative thought patterns, automatic assumptions, which I want you to talk about a little bit, generalized and rigid thinking, and self-limiting beliefs. Some of those thought patterns are really helpful on the job, right? So automatic assumptions can really keep you safe, right? Generalized and rigid thinking could keep you safe. So what of those snags, what do you think is the most challenging for people to move around? People, law enforcement.
Man. I mean, I would think the most challenging to move around is the subconscious biases.
Okay,
because
talk about that.
It's completely subconscious. You have to be able to verbalize them, or have somebody else mirror it back to you, because it's really hard to read the label. It's right.
Let's just stop there. Because somebody mirroring it back, I'm just thinking of relationships, and somebody mirroring that back does not necessarily feel good and could automatically be defensiveness, right? Okay, anyway, go on.
100%, but it's really hard to read the label from inside the bottle.
Oh God, it is, isn't it?
How do you see it unless somebody points it out? Because it's subconscious. It's something, but that requires you having to open up, and then maybe somebody reflecting that back to you. And then that requires the openness and not rigid thinking to say, wow, maybe I do have a bias around that, and I didn't even realize it. I never considered that could be the way that I see the world, that maybe isn't full reality. Maybe I'm putting expectations on things. Maybe I'm putting judgments on things, and I don't realize it because it's completely subconscious. So I would say that's probably the hardest to recognize, because it requires a lot of humility and the V word, that vulnerability, and an openness to consider that maybe you do have some biases that are not fully rooted in what is.
Yeah, truths. Very good. what's the benefit? And this is such an obvious statement, but I want you to say it. What's the benefit? You go around now, you speak, you coach, you work with other first responders in burnout. What's the benefit of addressing these? Because let's be honest, there's a lot of things we've talked about today that my audience, y'all are probably listening and being like, oh my gosh, next thing you're going to do is tell me to breathe. Of course we are. Of course we're going to tell you to breathe. Of course we're going to tell you to tactical breathe. Yes, of course. Of course we're going to tell you need sleep and you need to eat right.
Yeah.
Like all the things, right? But as you're going around and speaking and as you're working with people about burnout, why do people need to address this? Why and what do you see as shifts and changes in the people or the groups that you speak to?
So ironically, full circle moment, I think sometimes they just need the permission to slow down. I think sometimes they just need to hear the signs and symptoms to be able to identify it, because when we're going at rocket speed, we don't even slow down to think about it. You know, we tell ourselves, subconscious bias, that we don't have time to even deal with these things. And burnout has become so normalized in the first responder world because we've been running ourselves ragged for decades. And so it's like, well, yeah, of course you're tired. Of course you're cynical. Of course, it's like it comes standard issue with your uniform. So we making it very clear that it's damaging your mental health, your physical health, and your relationships, even your financial health. Man, you start to hit people in the pocketbook and they start to listen, right? So even things like that, just allowing them to see, holding up that mirror, and then giving them permission to slow down and say, listen, you're not going to be in this job forever. At some point, you're either going to retire with a beautiful retirement party and all your friends and cake and pizza and whatever, or you're going to leave on a medical, God forbid, or you're going to choose to leave on your own free will, or whatever the case is, but you're not going to be in the job forever. Stop sacrificing these other pieces of your life for this job. And I don't want to say because the job's not giving back to you, because it is. It's a meaningful job and it's impactful, but at what cost?
Yeah.
So giving them the permission to look at that and say, wow, I really do only get one shot at this life. Am I throwing all of my eggs in this one basket and, potentially shortening my life because of all of the stress that I'm piling on and not dealing with and feeling and working through and managing? And I think something else that hits really hard for people is when they learn that that burnout prevention truly is suicide prevention, because the final stage is not wanting to be in your own life anymore because you just are completely underwater. And people go, oh, wow. So we've normalized this middle ground. And so we've got to start catching people in this middle ground that we've normalized before they get over that waterfall. So I think, really just talking about it, throwing out some science and research, because you got to prove it, right? They're cynical.
Absolutely. Yes.
So if they're cynical, you got to give them the data and the evidence to be able to start to connect the dots.
A couple of things. Totally agree with everything you just said. I think you put it in such a way that, like, I love that you were like, full circle. It's permission, right? There's that permission. Yeah. But the biggest part, I agree, is the science. It's like this, when there's evidence, right? We need facts and evidence. When there's evidence, then we can go, see, it says so on this piece of paper, or it says so here. And it goes from being like a feeling to being something real. That's like when you were talking about your adrenal fatigue. We're like, oh, those pseudoscience. No, it's not pseudoscience. Yeah. It's freaking biology, right?
Yeah.
I also want to do a shout out to my spouses that are listening. Because the fact is that you also can struggle with burnout because you a lot of times are doing this alone. Your spouse might be, you might be like managing a household and trying to get everybody quiet so your spouse can sleep those 4 or 5 hours before they go back on shift. You're doing the groceries, you're doing the carpools, you're running the kids everywhere, you're doing their sports, you're showing up as cook, chief bottle washer, everything. I'm not going to say you're both parents. And even, I also think of like mom officers, right? They do things differently too. So, but my spouse says, I want you to know that burnout is real for you too. Because this lifestyle, you may think that you're doing it as a couple, but there is an aspect of isolation and loneliness that comes with this. And you need to also be aware. You need to give yourself permission. And some of that permission may be, no, we're not going to go to that party today, kids. No, we're not going to go involve ourselves in that sports. It might just be saying to your friends, I'm sorry, I have another appointment with myself in front of the TV, right? So it can be whatever you need to be, but spouses, please be aware that this is not just about your officer and their burnout, right? This is about you as well. And everything that AK is talking about is applicable to both of you. Both of you have to manage the burnout in this field. If you don't, it's going to burn your relationship as well. So please keep that in mind. With that, I'm going to recommend her book. I'm holding the book up right now in case you're listening. It's called Beat the Burnout, and it is Prevention and Recovery Solutions for Frontline Burnout. When I talked to AK the other day, I told her, this is a dense book. And she said, is that a compliment? And I'm like, yes. And I'm going to say this to you. I would say this is a very dense book. And the reason why I say that is because I don't think there's a lot of fluff in here. I think this is full of solutions, techniques, small things you can do. It's easily digestible. I love the acronyms you use. I love the relevance. I mean, like you could read 3 pages and implement something. That's what I think about this book. The cycle, the diagrams that you include in here are just, I love the chapter debriefs, by the way. It's a little cheat for me, but there's science in here. And as a clinician, I can be like, yes, this is a good book. It's going to go on my recommended. There are few books that I'm like recommended reading list. And this is going to be one. Like Stephanie Kahn's book is there. Gil Martin's book is there. Like this is going with that book, those books. That's how much I think of it.
So I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, thank you. I really, really appreciate that because just from a clinician standpoint too, because I am not a clinician. I've never claimed to be one. But I have done the research and it's there. And I think, if there's one thing I want to make sure that I say before we get off of here is that looking at the science, and there's over 100 resources and studies and all. I put a lot of research into it, but looking at the science, I want people to recognize that if you are experiencing burnout, it is not a failure. It is a result of the environment and doing meaningful work. It's really easy to get caught in the drift when you are passionate about your work and you know that it's meaningful. And so it is not a failure. It is your body just saying, hey, we need to slow down. And the science is there to say, yes, you need to slow down. And there's your permission.
Talk about your app. You have an app.
I do. It's called Lifesaver Academy. There's a lot of good free stuff on there. We talked a little bit about the vagus nerve. So some of the ways to kind of manage the vagus nerve, calm down, bring the cortisol levels down is you did the butterfly tapping. I think that's on there. But I have lots of different little tactics and techniques. I've got breathing, meditations, affirmations. There's a little SOS section. So if you find yourself really super elevated, just click on the app. The first thing that pops up is that SOS. And there's like 5 or 6 exercises you can do, like an anger release or the 5-4-3-2-1 method or whatever, and just have, and then it's literally just me guiding you through that. There's also a ton of resources on there, podcasts, books, YouTubes, lots of different things. And I'm going to be
free. There's free
yes.
content, and there's an upgrade for paid content, if I remember correctly, right?
Correct. Yes.
No reason not to
summer,
download it right now. Go to the App Store.
Right.
Lifesaver Academy. Go to the App Store.
Yeah. I'm going to be adding some more stuff, some more options, and potentially a group membership thing coming where we can, get together a couple times a month and get some laser seat coaching if you want. So yeah, it's going to be, it's already been a really great resource, but it's about to get even better.
I know you have a website. You want to drop that in real quick?
I do. So it's just akdozanti.com, akdozanti.com. And all of my socials are linked up there. My TikTok is probably my biggest platform. So if you have TikTok, find me there. It's just AK Dozanti. But everything else is linked up at akdozanti.com.
My gosh. This was such a great conversation. And I hope y'all all got a lot out of it. There are some podcasts that I thought of that we were talking. There's a sleep podcast that I had recently. There's also one on compartmentalization that we have. And then there's also one on the overtime trap, which is the finance part, right? That kind of does that cycle. I will drop all of the links in the show notes. And if you're driving, don't look at it right now. But if you're not, just go down into the show notes. If you're on your device, you can go into the show notes. It'll have all of the links. It'll have her book. It'll have the Lifesaver Academy app in there, these other podcasts, all of her contact information as well. So you can access that. And also, if you're there on your device, if you could give me maybe a review, is this meaningful to you? Send it to somebody else. Do you know somebody who's maybe in burnout and refuses to see it? Maybe push this to them. Who knows? If you're in a wellness or peer support team and you're like, hey, this is a valuable podcast, send it out to your team. The whole point of doing this is to help the community, right? We want to have a better community. And I know that, okay, this is part of your passion as well. That's why you speak. That's why we do things like write books, to impact and use our stories, right?
Yeah.
So I know we both want to impact the community. So thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Do you have any departing words for everybody?
No, well, maybe. I'll mill on that. But I just want to say thank you. This was a really incredible conversation and opportunity. And I hope that your listeners got an awful lot out of it. I think I would just echo what I said earlier is that if you're experiencing burnout, it is not a failure. And there are ways to get out of it. There are ways to mitigate. And they're often a lot simpler than we realize. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't go running to the next supplement, the next hack, the next whatever. Just look at the simple, manage the simple things, build the foundations, control the controllables, and that's how we really start to take those next right steps.
Perfect. So guys, take the first next right step to take care of your body, that engine that keeps you going, and beat the burnout. And grab her book. Love it. Thank you so much for joining us. Guys, thank you for your time and listening. Until next time, y'all keep it Code 4. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about the podcast or Cindy, check out code4couples.com. All intellectual property rights owned by CRLD2 Ventures, LLC, are protected by the firm of 9mm, 45 ACP, 5.56mm, and 12 gauge.